Do you worry about making mistakes in places like your interviews or when you're at work? Please try not to be. Hey everyone, I'm Emily, the Career Catalyst, and I know that it can be very intimidating if you're doing something like an interview where you really feel like you need to be putting your best foot forward. The truth is, though, you are allowed to make mistakes because you are absolutely allowed to be human. So let's just say, for example, that you have begun to tell a story in an interview and you get halfway through it and you suddenly think, oh my gosh, where am I going with this story? Or I don't remember how this question began, or whatever the heck might happen. Don't worry. Take a nice deep breath, try to relax as much as you can, and then stop yourself and say to your interviewer, I am so sorry, I got a little bit lost in the woods there. Could you please repeat the question? As you're kind of working through this, because you'll be nervous and because you'll feel a little bit like you failed, go ahead and jot down what the interviewer says and give yourself some time to think about it. Now, this is different, of course, if you're in person versus on camera. Hopefully you're not on the phone because it's very hard to get a read of the other person's reaction on the phone. But regardless of how you are in this interview, just give yourself some time to think. If you're on the phone or on camera, you'll want to be a little bit more mindful of the silences. So on the phone in particular, make some thinking sounds, as I call them. It's just so that they know that you're still there and you're thinking through it. And because the silence, when they can't see you, can stretch pretty long, pretty quickly. So be sure you're kind of walking them through the fact that you're thinking a little bit. If you're on camera, you just want to kind of make some thinking faces, right? You kind of look off to the side, think about it. You might take a note or two, and that just lets them know that you're still there, you're thinking about it, your camera hasn't frozen, everything is kind of going fine. Easiest, of course, is in person because they know that there aren't any tech issues. You're not glitching as you're talking to them, but do feel free to rethink it. If you get into the middle of a story and you think, I don't know where this is going, but you remember the question perfectly well, same idea. Stop, back out, say, I am so sorry, I don't know where I was going with that story. Allow me to start again and tell an entirely different story. Now, one of the questions that I get a lot is sometimes people will have a particular hang up around a specific word that they might need to use in the interviews. You know, we all have those goofy things that we can't quite say or that we fairly often stumble over. If that is the case, you have a couple of different options. There are a number of tools you can use online that will help you pronounce words that you find more difficult. And you can go syllable by syllable if you need. If you would rather avoid the words altogether, then draw up a list of synonyms. Just sketch them out, put them in your notepad, and bring them into the interview with you. Another mistake that you might make in this sort of more high pressure situation is potentially not understanding a question that you get asked. And this will happen in particular if you're changing industries. It's just a thing that happens because you're just not familiar with the jargon in the new industry yet. But also sometimes interviewers will ask a question in a way that is particularly confusing. If that happens, you are absolutely welcome to ask them to restate the question, to ask it differently, to define what it means a little bit. There are some very specific instances in which they can't do that. They will tell you if that's the case. The only time I've encountered it, it was for a very, very desirable role at a very desirable employer. And the people, I think it was a job fair. And so the people there weren't decision makers. They were just doing an initial screening. So they were very specifically in that set of circumstances not able to restate questions or to explain things or anything like that. Bunch of rules related to that. And so they were just telling people, I'm sorry, I can't give you any more than that. And folks just did their best with it. Again, that's pretty unusual and very much the exception. In almost every other case, if you ask them to restate the question, they will. And then you can say something like, I'm so sorry, I'm just not familiar with the jargon of this field yet, but I'm a quick learner. But then you also do want to make sure you do your best to answer the question. Now, I also mentioned making mistakes at work. This is just a very normal thing that we all do. And my best advice, as in all things, is to own up to your mistake, to apologize for it, and then to figure out how you can avoid mistakes of a similar nature moving forward. So if you got a date on a flyer wrong, for instance, then you're sort of double checking will be maybe to try for a year having a paper calendar that you put important dates on, or to have someone in your same space do a proofread for you that's more based on fact than on content, that kind of thing. I mean, not that that's not content, but it's a detail that your readers may very well have overlooked because they were checking for things like grammar and spelling. So see kind of what you can do to correct the errors that you've made. But the really key part of that, to me, is just owning up to the mistake that you have made and working to correct it. I worked with someone once who realized, he was working in one of those big box stores, and he realized that he had given someone far too much change. The person had handed him 2 bills and he assumed they were of the same denomination, and they were not. So he gave too much change. Realized that when he was cleaning out his drawer at the end of his shift. And what he did was he called his manager over and he said, "I'm really sorry. I totally messed this up. I gave too much change, and you can take this out of my paycheck, if that makes sense." And he didn't. He could have said, we're really busy. I was really stressed. He didn't do any of that, although I do think it can be appropriate to sort of give context for why you made a mistake. But his manager was so impressed that he just owned up to it and apologized for it. He also gave some information about how he planned to correct himself moving forward. He just said something very simple, like, "I will pay more attention to the bills I get tomorrow," or whatever. But his manager was really impressed and actually wrote a commendation for him just for owning his mistake and saying that he would do better moving forward. So, it feels bad. It absolutely feels bad. We can often feel very defensive when someone points out an error to us. And that's fine too. Don't try to not be yourself, but try to take the feedback in after the fact and figure out how you can be a stronger worker or potential worker, a new hire moving forward. And don't worry about little details as you're doing things like interviewing, like pausing and saying and correcting your words and all of that. That's just being human. I hope this helps kind of demystify some of the stuff around making mistakes when you're interviewing or in a job. Let me know if you have questions, and I will see you soon.